In the name of the God who loves us and knows us and cares for us. Amen. Please be seated. So in the passage we heard earlier from the book of Acts, Paul arrives in Athens and he notices something fascinating. Now remember, the book of Acts is the fourth book in the New Testament, and it tells the story of the early church. It's the story of how Jesus' followers began to build community and live out their Christian faith in the wake of Jesus' death and resurrection. Paul is a key figure in the book of Acts. He began as a persecutor of the early church, but then had this miraculous, life-changing encounter with the risen Christ and became one of the most prolific early Christian writers and one of the most effective early Christian evangelists. He would go from town to town across the ancient world, proclaiming the good news of God's love and forgiveness for all people. And he went around planting churches, not physical buildings, but communities of believers who gathered together for meals and prayer and song and learning. The early Christian communities were deeply countercultural because they attempted to break down the harsh social norms and divisions that were imposed by Rome. The empire kept people in line by assigning different values to people based on class, race, religion, ethnicity. Jesus' followers proclaimed an entirely different way. They found unity in their diversity, and they embraced a God-given equality among believers. Take note in case you ever find yourself face-to-face with a Christian nationalist. You've heard it here first. Diversity, yes. Equality among believers. Now, there are lots of things to critique about Paul. You might have some of your own critiques about Paul if you've read his writings. But one of the remarkable things he did was to proclaim this radically expansive gospel at a time when the world was deeply stratified and repressive. And perhaps nowhere do we see that more clearly than in Athens, because Paul does not arrive with judgment for this place. He arrives full of curiosity. And he discovers that beneath the temples and the idols and philosophies of this famous city, there is something deeply human. People are searching for meaning, stability. They're looking for protection in an uncertain world. Athens was one of the great intellectual and cultural centers of the ancient world. Philosophical, politically charged, spiritually crowded. The Roman Empire loomed over public life, and life felt precarious in all the familiar human ways: war, disease, economic anxiety, social upheaval. The future was uncertain. And so the Athenians tried to cover their bases. They had gods of the sea, gods of fertility, gods of war, gods of commerce, gods of the household. Religion was tied to survival. You honored the gods because you wanted protection and order and blessing and safety. And apparently, just to be extra careful, they even built an altar inscribed to an unknown God. In other words, just in case we missed one, just in case there's still some power out there we do not understand, just in case someone or something might be offended. It was, in many ways, an altar built to anxiety. I think we can understand that impulse, right? Because we also live in this moment shaped by uncertainty and fear. We live in a world where people are deeply anxious about the future, about democracy and violence and war and climate change, economic instability, loneliness, whether life will get better or harder for the next generation. I read an article recently in the New York Times, you might have seen it, about declining declining birth rates. And the idea it explored was that There's this growing fear among people that we are bringing children into a world that is uncertain. Young people today are hesitant to bring new life into the world because they aren't sure what they will actually be able to offer in the future. Many of us, whatever stage of life, are asking, can life itself still be trusted? Is the future still worth pursuing? Are we alone in all of this? We might not be building altars anymore, but we still create them. Altars to control, altars to certainty, altars to productivity, altars to wealth or self-protection or endless preparation. Ways of trying to reassure ourselves that if we can just manage enough, predict enough, secure enough, perhaps we can keep our vulnerability at bay. Fear always tempts us to organize our lives around protection and control. But the gospel invites us to organize our lives around relationship and care. So Paul stands in the middle of this anxious city, and he offers a radically different vision of God. Not a distant deity who must be appeased, not a God hidden behind fear, not a God waiting for us to fail. Instead, Paul says, the God who made the world and everything in it is not far from each one of us. It is in him that we live and move and have our being. This is where the Christian story begins. Not with a distant God, but with a God already nearer to us than our own breath. A God who knows us, a God who holds us, a God whom our very life already exists within. God is not distant from human suffering or hidden behind the instability of the world. God is already here, already sustaining life, already moving among us. And that same promise echoes again in the Gospel of John that Brother Andrew just read a few moments ago. Because in this passage, Jesus' disciples are wrestling with a similar fear. What will happen to us when we're left alone? The passage actually brings us back in time from the book of Acts to when Jesus was still alive, but when he was preparing to leave the disciples. The future felt uncertain, the world felt unstable, and they did not know who they would be without their leader, their teacher, their friend. Jesus says to them, I will not leave you orphaned. Because to be orphaned is not simply to lose a parent, though certainly that's part of it. But in the spiritual sense, to be orphaned is to feel fundamentally alone in the world, unprotected, untethered, without guidance or care or belonging. Many of us might feel something like that in these times. Spiritually exhausted, emotionally overwhelmed, unsure where God is, unsure what kind of future is coming. And into that fear, Jesus doesn't offer certainty or control. He offers presence. I will not leave you orphaned. You are not abandoned. You are not alone. My spirit will abide with you. The opposite of orphaned in this gospel is relationship. You in me and I in you. You belong to God. You are already held inside this divine, expansive love. You will never be abandoned. We all need care in order to survive. We need tenderness and guidance, protection, encouragement, companionship. None of us come into this world fully formed or fully self-sufficient. We become who we are through the relationships of love that nurture and sustain us. Which is why today, Mother's Day, carries so much emotional weight for so many of us. Because motherhood in all of its forms is bound up with the most vulnerable work of nurturing life. And nurturing life always requires courage, especially when the world feels uncertain or when we ourselves are afraid. To raise children, to care for another person, to remain tender in a hard world, to believe life is still worth protecting and cultivating despite grief or fear. That is holy work. For some of us, today is a day of deep gratitude and celebration. For others, it brings grief. Some are celebrating mothers or motherhood. Others are mourning mothers and children who are no longer with us. Some of us are carrying complicated relationships. Some are grieving children or parents they never had. Some are wondering what kind of world we are leaving behind for the next generation. Mother's Day can have a way of intensifying whatever we carry most deeply: love, gratitude, longing, loss, hope, fear. And yet beneath all of it, there is this deeper truth running through both of our readings and through the currents of our own lives, that God has not abandoned creation. God continues to nurture life among us, and we are called to do the same. Jesus says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. And the commandment is so simple: love one another as I have loved you. Jesus is not asking for moral perfection or rule following. He invites us to participate in God's life-giving love, to nurture life, to protect dignity, to make room for one another, to refuse despair, to keep choosing compassion and connection in this incredibly fearful age. Every act of care becomes a declaration. The future is still worth belonging to. Every act of tenderness says fear will not have the final word. The Athenians built altars because they feared abandonment by unknown powers. But Jesus says, you are not abandoned. You are known. God knows you. God is holding you. We are all accompanied by the spirit of truth that still abides among us. And because we are loved in this way, we are free to become people who nurture life with courage, with tenderness, with hope. I heard an interview this week with the author Isabel Allende, who spoke about writing to her daughter after her daughter fell into a coma as a result of unexpected complications from what should have been a non-life-threatening medical disorder that she had had her whole life. And at first, Allende was writing her letters because she thought she would need help remembering her life when she woke up from the coma. But later, when she realized that her daughter might not recover, the tone of the letters changed, but she still wrote. She talked about the jasmines blooming outside. She promised her daughter that she would never be alone. But then after her daughter died, Allende said she felt completely empty. She couldn't get out a single word. What was the point? But her own mother came to her, and her own mother said, if you don't find a way to continue to write, you will die. This is a long tunnel that you will have to walk alone, but there is light at the end. Just keep walking, one step at a time, one day, word by word. Eventually, somehow, miraculously, she found the courage to pick up a pen, and writing did become the lifeline that helped her carry on. This is what faith is like: not certainty, not the absence of grief or fear, but finding the courage to nurture life anyway, finding the courage to continue to love anyway, finding the courage to move through the tunnel together, accompanied by this Spirit, by this God who does not abandon us. Amen.